fraught with great difficulty. I, Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States, do proclaim, declare, and make known. This is from a wartime proclamation the President issued in December 1863, nearly a year after he issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Its title, A Proclamation of Amnesty and Reconstruction. Rebels who accepted the end of slavery and swore allegiance to the Union would be pardoned, said Lincoln. Their property, except for human beings, restored. Exceptions included high-ranking Confederate officials, U.S. senators and representatives who had joined the Confederacy, and Confederate soldiers who had abused black soldiers and their white officers. With this proclamation came the President's 10% plan. If at least 10% of a Confederate state's white men eligible to vote before the war accepted his amnesty terms, that state could create a new state government and rejoin the Union. Lincoln also announced that he would not object to any provision which may be adopted by such state government in relation to the freed people of such state, which shall recognize and declare their permanent freedom, provide for their education, and which may yet be consistent as a temporary arrangement with their present condition as a laboring, landless, and homeless class. The 10% plan got a thumbs down from many of Lincoln's fellow Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives and U.S. Senate. Especially galled were the radical Republicans. These passionate abolitionists wanted the rebels severely punished. What's more, they wanted not only true liberty, but also true justice for black people. They included the learned Massachusetts Senator Charles Sumner, who had urged Lincoln to declare enslaved people free early on in the war. Sumner took the view that the Confederate states had committed suicide in leaving the Union and should be treated as territories, that is, ruled by Congress. The flinty Pennsylvania representative, Thaddeus Stevens, agreed. There was also Ohio's Senator Benjamin Franklin Wade. In February 1864, Wade and another radical, Maryland's Representative Henry Winter Davis, sponsored a bill with much tougher requirements for a former Confederate state to be readmitted to the Union. For one, a majority of its eligible voters had to swear allegiance to the Union. The Wade-Davis bill also called for the President to appoint military governors for the states that had seceded. The bill cleared Congress in July 1864. Lincoln responded to it with a pocket veto. That is, he simply didn't sign it, just tucked it away, so to speak. Earlier that spring, on April 8, 1864, the U.S. Senate passed the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. It took a while, 9 months, but finally, on January 31, 1865, the amendment passed in the House. As mandated by the Constitution, the amendment was then sent to the states for ratification. It was ratified on December 6th of that year, finally abolishing slavery in the United States, 8 months after the end of the Civil War. On January 16, 1865, the Union's General William Tecumseh Sherman issued a field order that met with hearty support from black people and their white allies. The irascible Sherman had recently completed his march to the sea, inflicting about $100 million worth of damage on Georgia between the time that his more than 60,000 troops left Atlanta in mid-November 1864 and reached Savannah on December 21, 1864. Thousands of black people made their great escape with that army. A few weeks after Sherman captured Savannah, his Christmas gift to Lincoln, he issued Special Field Order No. 15. Special Field Order No. 15 reserved, exclusively for black people, roughly 400,000 acres of land confiscated from rebels in coastal South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. Each head of household was allowed up to 40 acres. There was no promise of mules, but some surplus Army mules were distributed at one point. Sherman's order stemmed, in part, from a historic meeting on the evening of January 12, 1865, between Sherman, Secretary of War Stanton, and 20 of Savannah's black ministers and church leaders. This meeting took place at Sherman's temporary headquarters, cotton merchant Charles Greene's Gothic Revival mansion on Madison Square. The black attendees included 5 men who had been born free: James Lynch, age 26, Adolphus Delmotte, age 28, Alexander Harris, 47, James Porter, 39, and James Mills, 56. The group's brilliant spokesman, Garrison Frazier, 67, was among the men who had been born into slavery. This North Carolina native had purchased his and his wife's freedom in the late 1850s for $1,000 in silver and gold. After introductions came Stanton's questions. First, what was their understanding of Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation? "So far as I understand," responded Garrison Frazier, "President Lincoln's proclamation to the rebellious states, it is, that if they would lay down their arms and submit to the laws of the United States before the 1st of January, 1863, all should be well. But if they did not, then all the slaves in the rebel states should be free henceforth and forever." Next question. State what you understand by slavery and the freedom that was to be given by the President's proclamation. "Slavery is receiving by irresistible power the work of another man, and not by his consent," Frazier replied. "The freedom, as I understand it, promised by the proclamation is taking us from under the yoke of bondage and placing us where we could reap the fruit of our own labor and take care of ourselves and assist the government in maintaining our freedom." Stanton's most important question was this: state in what manner you think you can take care of yourselves, and how can you best assist the government in maintaining your freedom? Frazier didn't miss a beat. Land. That's what his people most hungered for. Land and the freedom to be self-sufficient, to live out from under the shadow of their former owners. What course can be clearer? What course more politic? What course will be so just, so humane, so thoroughly conducive to the political weal and the national advancement, as that the government should immediately bestow confiscated lands upon these freed men who know best how to cultivate them, and will joyfully bring their brawny arms, their willing hearts, and their skilled hands to the glorious labor of cultivating as their own the lands which they had bought and paid for by their sweat and blood. What shall be done with the slaves in the November 23, 1861 issue of New York's Weekly Anglo-African, established by black activist Thomas Hamilton? When asked whether black people preferred to live scattered among the whites or in colonies by yourselves, Frazier said, "I would prefer to live by ourselves, for there is a prejudice against us in the South that will take years to get over." 4 days later, Sherman issued Special Field Order No. 15. Secretary Stanton had no problem with the freedmen receiving land. However, he questioned the legality of Sherman's order. "It seems to me, General, that this is contrary to law." "There is no law here except mine, Mr. Secretary," replied the general. Sherman was by no means an abolitionist, but a man who very much wanted to be free from the thousands of black people trailing his advance troops. Soon to head off with his army to conquer the Carolinas, Sherman put General Rufus Saxton in charge of land distribution. The pews in the body of the house were filled, reported the Savannah Daily Herald on February 3, 1865, of a meeting in one of Savannah's black churches. There, General Saxton officially gave people the great good news about Sherman's game-changing order. The galleries presented a sable cloud of faces, the Savannah Daily Herald went on to say. Seats were placed in the aisles, and every seat in the house was occupied, and there was still a crowd at the door anxious to obtain an entrance. After the singing of America and prayer, General Saxton addressed the crowd, urging hope and hard work. So did Reverend Mansfield French, a white minister. They must take their hoes, spades, and shovels and lay out their gardens and raise vegetables for the market, and chickens, and corn and cotton. That's how the Savannah Daily Herald summed up French's remarks. More aid, more lifelines were on the way. In March 1865, the U.S. Congress created the U.S. Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands to aid destitute black and white people in the South. At its helm was Old Prayer Book, the devout Christian abolitionist General Oliver Otis Howard, a native of Maine. It became known as the Freedmen's Bureau. Frederick Douglass's son, Charles, was one of the first black clerks General Howard hired for the Bureau's office in Washington, D.C. Food, shelter, clothing, hospitals, schools, jobs, parcels of abandoned land, protection. This was just some of the aid the Freedmen's Bureau provided. Thousands of black people also looked to the Bureau to perform legal marriages. With offices in 15 southern states and the District of Columbia, offices staffed largely by soldiers, the Freedmen's Bureau also oversaw the Freedmen's Savings and Trust Company. Congress initially created this bank to help black soldiers and veterans be fiscally responsible. However, in the end, the Freedmen's Bank, as it became known, opened its doors to any African Americans seeking to lay aside dollars and dimes. Some months ago, I complained to your department that Mrs. Charles Strauss and Mrs. Clinch, her sister, to whom I formerly belonged, detained my son Henry, 9 years old. Since I had heard that Mr. Charles Strauss had received a letter from the Freedmen's Bureau ordering the surrender of the child to me, but they still detain the child. Elizabeth Stone of Newberry, South Carolina, in a March 18, 1867 letter to Robert Kingston Scott, Assistant Commissioner of South Carolina's Freedmen's Bureau. New Jersey-born abolitionist Tunis Gulick Campbell, Sr., was another black Freedmen's Bureau staffer. Thanks to Secretary of War Stanton, Campbell became governor of Ossabaw, St. Catharines, and 3 other Georgia Sea Islands. "We left with rations and a few families, and at Hilton Head got more," wrote Campbell in an April 13, 1865 letter to New York's Freedmen's Relief Association. Among other things, he asked the charity to send books for schools he planned to open. Campbell's letter was penned 4 days after General Lee's surrender to General Grant at Appomattox, and 2 days after Abraham Lincoln's last speech. On the evening of Tuesday, April 11, 1865, on the second-floor balcony of the White House's North Portico, President Lincoln delivered an address on the way forward. "We meet this evening, not in sorrow, but in gladness of heart. The evacuation of Petersburg and Richmond, and the surrender of the principal insurgent army, give hope of a righteous and speedy peace whose joyous expression cannot be restrained." Lincoln warned that the re-inauguration of the national authority, Reconstruction, would be fraught with great difficulty. But there was hope. "Some 12,000 voters in the heretofore slave state of Louisiana," said the president, "have sworn allegiance to the Union, assumed to be the rightful political power of the state, held elections, organized a state government, adopted a free state constitution giving the benefit of public schools equally to black and white. What's more, the Louisiana legislature had the power to grant black men the right to vote." Lincoln hoped that the Bayou State would do that for some. Lincoln said that if he had his druthers, black suffrage would be limited to the very intelligent black men and to black soldiers and veterans. Outside was a vast sea of faces, illuminated by the lights that burned in the festal array of the White House and stretching far out into the misty darkness, reported the Sacramento Daily Union. It was a silent, intent, and perhaps surprised multitude. "That is the last speech he will ever make," muttered actor John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer. Booth was outraged over the possibility of any black man having the right to vote in Louisiana or anywhere else. A few days later, on Good Friday, Booth shot Lincoln in the head as the president sat with his wife and 2 guests in the presidential box at Ford's Theater. The play was Our American Cousin, an English farce. Lincoln died the following day at 7:22 a.m. At 10 a.m., his vice president, former slaveholder Andrew Johnson, a Democrat, was sworn in as the nation's 17th president. A native of North Carolina who moved to Tennessee as a young man, the combative, often crass Andrew Johnson had fiercely opposed Tennessee's secession. A U.S. senator at the time, he was the only Southern senator who did not resign his seat when his state did, in fact, secede. During the war, once Union forces virtually controlled Tennessee, Lincoln made Johnson military governor of the volunteer state. 2 years later, Johnson became his running mate in his bid for re-election on the National Union ticket. 2 weeks before the election of 1864, on the steps of the state capitol in Nashville, Governor Andrew Johnson addressed a pro-Union black rally. Acknowledging that the Emancipation Proclamation had not declared free the people enslaved in Tennessee, as it wasn't under Confederate control, Johnson proclaimed freedom, full, broad, and unconditional, to every man in Tennessee. Johnson, born dirt poor, then went on a rant against Tennessee's white elite, a class he thoroughly despised. "Let them gather their treasonable conclaves elsewhere, among their friends in the Confederacy. They shall not hold their conspiracies in Nashville." After he got that off his chest, Johnson plowed on. "Looking at this vast crowd of colored people and reflecting through what a storm of persecution and obloquy they are compelled to pass, I am almost induced to wish that, as in the days of old, a Moses might arise who should lead them safely to their promised land of freedom and happiness." "You are our Moses," people shouted. Johnson objected. "God, no doubt, has prepared somewhere an instrument for the great work he designs to perform in behalf of this outraged people, and in due time your leader will come forth. Your Moses will be revealed to you." "We want no Moses but you," the crowd cried out. Johnson relented. "Well then, humble and unworthy as I am, if no other better shall be found, I will indeed be your Moses, and lead you through the Red Sea of war and bondage to a fairer future of liberty and peace." What would he be to white Southerners who had risen up in rebellion against the Union? Shortly after Andrew Johnson became president, he told a delegation from Indiana that treason must be made odious, and traitors must be punished and impoverished. The nation waited anxiously to see what exactly President Andrew Johnson would do.